Picture the inside of a body, not metaphorically, literally. A man, small, muscled, grinning the grin of someone who has never once in his life been told no and made it stick, is folding himself into the open mouth of a sleeping goddess. Her name is Hina, the great lady of night, keeper of the underworld, and right now she is lying on a hillside with her thighs open to the sky like the jaws of a trap that hasn't sprung yet. The man's name is Māui, and what he is about to attempt is the single most audacious act in the history of Pacific mythology. He's going to climb inside a goddess, travel backward through her body while she sleeps, and emerge from her mouth on the other side. Reborn, and in the process, he intends to kill death itself. If it works, no one on earth will ever have to die again. Not from sickness, not from war, not from old age. Every funeral that was ever going to happen, unhappens. Every grief that was ever going to be felt, unhappens with it. That is the size of what's at stake. Māui isn't chasing treasure or revenge or a woman's hand in marriage. He is trying to uninvent death. He has already done impossible things by this point in his life. He has slowed the sun with rope woven by his own hands. He has hauled entire islands up from the bottom of the ocean on a fishhook made from his grandmother's jawbone. He has made a habit, in other words, of walking up to the walls the universe put up and simply not stopping. His companions, small forest birds, fantails, who have followed him on this final expedition, watch him disappear feet first into the goddess's body. He has told them one thing and one thing only: do not laugh. Silence is not a small ask when you're watching a man crawl into a sleeping god. But they hold it. They hold it while his legs disappear. They hold it while his torso disappears. They hold it while nothing is left of Māui but his head and shoulders, glistening, moving deeper into the dark. And then the fantail laughs. It isn't cruelty. It's just what fantails do. Quick, nervous, involuntary bursts of sound, the same reflex that makes a person snort at a funeral at the worst possible moment. But Hina isn't sleeping so deeply that a laugh can't reach her. Her eyes open. Her body, the very tunnel Māui is traveling through, clenches shut. That is how the greatest trickster in Polynesian mythology dies, crushed mid-transformation by the woman he was trying to outwit because a bird couldn't keep quiet for 30 more seconds. Here's the part that should stop you cold. This isn't a story about failure. It's a story about the price of ambition set against the one wall in the universe that Pacific mythology insists cannot be climbed. Māui broke the sun's schedule. He broke the ocean floor open with a hook. He broke almost every rule anyone ever handed him. Death is the only rule he couldn't break. And the storytellers who passed this tale down for 1,000 years, canoe to canoe, coastline to coastline, wanted you to sit with that. They wanted the ending to sting. So here is the question this entire story is going to spend the next hour and 20 minutes answering through 11 more heroes, a dozen island nations, and several thousand years of oral memory. If you cannot defeat death, what can a human being legitimately defy? And what happens spiritually, socially, physically to the ones who try? Every hero you're about to meet is an answer to that question, filed under a different heading. Some defy the sky, some defy their fathers, some defy the sea itself, or the rigid hierarchy of who is allowed to rule, and who is allowed to be nothing more than a discarded, illegitimate son. Every single one of them pays a price, and the price is the point. To understand why Maui's death mattered so much to the people who told this story, though, we have to rewind. All the way back to the beginning of his life, when he wasn't yet a demigod who defied death, but an infant who very nearly was one of its casualties. Here's something most retellings skip, and it changes everything about how you should read the rest of his story. Māui was thrown away. He was born prematurely, wrapped by his exhausted mother in a knot of her own hair and cast into the sea. Not out of cruelty exactly, but out of the desperate grief of a woman who believed her half-formed child could not possibly survive. The ocean was meant to be his grave. It wasn't. The waves, instead of drowning him, cradled him. Ancestors and sea spirits found the tiny bundle and raised him in secret, hidden from the world of ordinary people, until the day he was strong enough to walk into his mother's house uninvited and announce that he was her son, the one she'd given up for dead. Sit with that origin for a second, because it's the key that unlocks every reckless thing he does afterward. Maui spends his entire life being underestimated. He is the youngest of 5 brothers, the runt, the joke, the one nobody expected to matter. And every single one of his legendary feats is, underneath the mythology, an act of proving a discarded child wrong about his own worth. By the time he is grown, Maui has noticed something wrong with the world. The sun races across the sky far too fast. People wake, they barely begin their work, fishing, planting, weaving, building, and already the light is gone. Entire lives are being lived in half-time. His own mother complains that her cooking never finishes before dark. His brothers think the problem is unsolvable. You don't negotiate with the sun. You certainly don't fight it. Maui disagrees, and here's what makes this moment genuinely dangerous rather than simply clever. The sun in Polynesian cosmology isn't a ball of gas. It's a being, ancient and short-tempered, and the plan Maui proposes is essentially an ambush. He and his brothers weave ropes from sacred flax. Strong enough, they hope, to hold something that has never once in its existence been forced to slow down. And they travel to the pit from which the sun rises each morning, arriving in darkness, laying their traps, and waiting. Understand what's on the table here. If the ropes snap, the brothers are standing at point-blank range to a furious solar deity with nothing but flax and nerve between them and incineration. If the sun simply refuses to bargain, they've wasted a plan that took real communal sacrifice. Sacred flax isn't casually spared. For nothing. And they cannot simply try again next week. You don't get a second ambush on something this powerful. The sun rises, the ropes catch, and what follows is not a clean victory. It's a brutal, close-range beating, Maui striking the trapped, blazing figure again and again with a magic weapon. In some tellings, his ancestor's jawbone again, the same jawbone that will later become his fishhook, until the sun, scorched and staggering, agrees to a new pace across the sky. Slower, fair, livable. Notice what kind of victory this is. Not diplomacy, not charm, but violence married to preparation. Maui doesn't out-talk the sun. He outplans it, and then he's willing to hurt it until it agrees to change. That combination, meticulous preparation plus a willingness to go all the way, is the through line of everything else he does. His next act is, if anything, even more audacious, because this time the stakes aren't measured in daylight hours. They're measured in land itself. Maui wants to fish. His brothers, tired of being outdone, try to leave without him, so he hides in the bottom of their canoe until they're too far out to sea to turn back. When he reveals himself, furious, they have no choice but to let him fish alongside them. He uses a hook carved from the jawbone of his ancestor, a detail worth pausing on because it means the tool of this creation myth is literally made from someone else's death. Creation in this telling is built out of ancestral remains. Nothing comes from nothing. Everything is inherited, even magic. He baits the hook with his own blood, striking his nose to draw it, and casts the line into water so deep his brothers can't see bottom. What bites is not a fish. It's a landmass. Vast, ancient, alive beneath the surface, and Maui, straining every muscle, hauls it upward while commanding his brothers not to look back. and not to cut anything as they row toward shore. This is the part where the story tells you something true about human nature. They don't listen. Impatient, greedy, maybe frightened, his brothers begin hacking at the rising land before the proper rites are complete, and the surface, meant to emerge smooth, comes up jagged, mountainous, split into valleys and ridges. In Maori tradition, this fish becomes Te Ika a Māui, the North Island of New Zealand, and its broken, mountainous geography is explained to this day as the scar tissue of impatience. What was at risk here wasn't just a fishing trip, it was the shape of a country. The story is quietly making an argument. Creation requires discipline, and the failure of the people around the hero to hold their nerve leaves permanent marks on the land itself. Every mountain range is a monument to somebody not waiting long enough. And so we arrive back where we started. The goddess of night, the fantail's laugh, the crushing dark. After slowing the sun and hauling up an island, Maui had every reason to believe there was no ceiling above him. That's exactly why the ending matters so much. The myth needed structurally to show its audience a limit. A culture that tells endless stories of a hero defying nature without ever showing him fail would eventually stop believing its own myths. Death had to be the one door that stays locked, or nothing else in the story would carry weight. Maui's legacy, then, isn't humans can do anything. It's sharper and more honest than that. Humans can do far more than they're told they can, right up until the one line that defines what it means to be human in the first place. He is proof of both possibility and boundary in the same body, which raises an obvious follow-up question. If the sky and sea can be defied, but death cannot, what about the space in between? What about the boundary between the mortal world and the divine one? Not death, but heaven. Is that wall climbable? One hero decided to find out, and unlike Maui, he didn't try to force his way through with rope and violence. He tried something almost nobody in this entire mythology attempts: patience. Every culture eventually tells a story about someone trying to reach heaven. Usually it ends badly. Towers collapse, wings melt, cities are scattered into 1,000 languages as punishment for the attempt. Pacific mythology tells a version of this story too, through the Maori hero Tāwhaki, but with a twist that separates it from almost every other reaching for the sky myth on Earth. Tāwhaki isn't punished for trying. He's rewarded, but only because of how he tries. Before he becomes a seeker of heaven, though, he's something much darker, a son with a debt of blood to collect. Tāwhaki's father has been wronged, murdered, or grievously betrayed, depending on the telling, by people who believed the family posed no threat and could be dealt with quietly. This is the part of the story that could have stayed a simple revenge tale, the kind told in every warrior tradition on Earth. A son grows up, trains, returns, and kills the men who killed his father. Pacific mythology gives us that beginning. Tāwhaki does seek retribution, he does confront those responsible. But the story doesn't stop there, and that refusal to stop is the entire point. A myth about successful revenge teaches one lesson: strength restores honor. This myth wants to teach something else, so it keeps going, past the point where vengeance would normally end a story, into an entirely different register. Somewhere beyond the reach of ordinary geography, a vine hangs down from the heavens to the earth. Sometimes described as a rope, sometimes a spider's thread, sometimes a beam of light solidified into something climbable. It connects the world of the living to Rangi, the Sky Father's domain, where sacred knowledge, incantations, and the deep architecture of natural law are kept by beings who do not suffer trespassers gladly. Tāwhaki climbs it. Here's what makes this genuinely tense, dramatically. This isn't a ladder with rungs you can trust. In most versions, the vine is treacherous by design. It sways, it thins, it seems built to test, rather than transport. Some tellings include a warning chant Tāwhaki must recite correctly to keep the vine solid beneath his hands. Falter, mispronounce, lose your nerve, and the vine turns to mist, sending you plummeting back to earth. This is a climb where the punishment for doubt is instant and total. Consider what he's risking. Unlike Maui's ambush of the sun, which is a single violent confrontation with a clear beginning and end, Tāwhaki's climb is sustained exposure. Ours may be longer of vulnerability, with no ropes tying him back to earth, no brothers waiting below to pull him back if things go wrong. If Maui's story is about the courage of an ambush, Tāwhaki's is about the courage of endurance, the willingness to stay exposed in danger for far longer than adrenaline alone can carry a person. And when he arrives, he isn't handed anything. The celestial beings he meets test him, not with combat in most versions, but with something more Pacific traditions consistently value above brute strength, the purity of his intention and the discipline of his conduct. Was he climbing for revenge, still carrying his rage upward like a weapon, or had something in him changed on the way up? This is the detail that makes Tāwhaki's story genuinely subversive within its own tradition. By the time he reaches the top, revenge is no longer what he's after. He wants understanding. He wants the sacred incantations that govern weather, the natural order, the relationships between ancestors and descendants, the operating knowledge of the universe itself, not power over the men who wronged his family. And he's given it, not because he demanded it, and not because he defeated anyone in single combat to earn it, but because he arrived humbled rather than hardened. The story is making a pointed argument about what worthiness means in a culture that could easily have valorized only warriors. Strength gets you up the mountain, perhaps, but it's the shedding of the warrior's need for vengeance that gets you through the door at the top. Contrast this directly with Maui. Maui breaks rules through force and cunning and pays for it, eventually, with his life. Tāwhaki approaches a boundary just as impossible, the literal gap between earth and heaven, and survives it, but only by transforming internally along the way. Two heroes, two philosophies of limit-breaking. Force versus surrender, and the myths seem to know exactly which one they're contrasting because they were almost certainly told back-to-back around the same fires. There's something here worth naming out loud, because it takes us from myths about defying cosmic forces, the sun, death, the sky, into a very different, and in some ways much more human, category of heroism. Maui hauled up an island by brute supernatural force, but somebody still had to cross the ocean to find it. Somebody had to do the unglamorous, unmagical, terrifyingly practical work of sailing into open water with no myth to protect them, just knowledge, nerve, and the stars. That hero's name was Kupe, and unlike everyone we've discussed so far, he isn't remembered for bending nature to his will. He's remembered for something almost the opposite, for reading nature so precisely that the ocean stopped being an obstacle and became instead a legible map. Here's a fact that should recalibrate how impressive Kupe's story really is. Long before European sailors dared to lose sight of coastlines for more than a few days at a time, Polynesian navigators were making intentional, repeatable voyages across thousands of miles of open Pacific Ocean, without compasses, without written charts, without any instrument you'd recognize from a maritime museum. They used the rising and setting points of stars. They used the direction and rhythm of ocean swells, felt through the hull of the canoe itself. They used the flight patterns of birds, the color of the water, the shape of clouds sitting low on a horizon that might indicate land 2 days away. This wasn't folklore dressed up as skill. It was one of the most sophisticated navigational systems in human history, developed and refined over countless generations entirely without writing it down. Kupe is the mythic face of that system. And his story matters not because it shows a man defying a god, but because it shows something quietly more radical. A man trusting a body of knowledge enough to bet his life, and the lives of everyone who followed him, on it. In the version of the story most often told, Kupe doesn't set out to discover new land. He sets out chasing something. A great sea creature, sometimes described as an enormous octopus that has been raiding his fishing grounds and, in some tellings, has wronged his family directly. This isn't an idle expedition. It's personal, urgent, arguably reckless. Kupe pursues the creature further and further from shore, past the point where any reasonable navigator would turn back, driven by the same stubborn refusal to stop energy that defines so many of these heroes. Think about what that pursuit actually risks. Every mile further from home is a mile with less certainty of return. Less food, less fresh water, no way to signal for help, no rescue possible if the canoe is damaged or the weather turns. And Kupe isn't chasing a known destination. He's chasing a moving target across open water with no guarantee the pursuit ever ends. It does end, eventually. Not necessarily with the creature's defeat, but with landfall. Kupe finds himself in the sight of an entirely unknown coastline, mountainous, cloud-wrapped, unlike anything in his home islands. This is Aotearoa, New Zealand, a landmass that, at the time of his arrival, existed for his people only as empty ocean on the mental map of the known world. This is where Kupe's story becomes genuinely different from a simple discovery tale, and it's worth slowing down on because the choice he makes here is the entire morale of his myth. He explores the land. He names its features: bays, headlands, rivers, laying a grid of memory over an unfamiliar place so it can be found again, described again, returned to again. This naming isn't decoration. In oral navigation cultures, a named landmark is a retrievable landmark. Kupe isn't just admiring the coastline. He's building the very system of memory that will let other people follow the same path he did without needing the same luck, the same chase, the same lone act of courage. And then, instead of settling, instead of claiming this newfound land purely for himself and his immediate family, he turns his canoe around and sails all the way back home. Stop and consider what that return voyage means. He has just found something extraordinary: uninhabited, fertile, unclaimed land at the edge of the known world. The obvious, self-interested move is to stay, to become the sole ruler of a new domain, to keep the discovery for himself and whoever traveled with him. Instead, Kupe sails back across the same brutal, uncertain distance he just crossed, doubling his risk for no personal territorial gain, purely to carry word of what he'd found back to his own people. That return voyage is the real heroism of Kupe's story, more than the chase, more than the landfall itself. Maui's heroism is measured in force applied to the world. Tāwhaki's is measured in the internal transformation required to reach a sacred space. Kupe's is measured in something quieter and, in a way, more civically minded: the willingness to turn discovery into shared inheritance rather than private treasure. Later Polynesian migrations to New Zealand, the Great Waka, the ancestral voyaging canoes whose names and lineages many Maori iwi trace their descent from today, are remembered as following, in some form, the path Kupe first read into the ocean and then handed back to his people as usable knowledge. There's something worth pausing on here before we move forward, because it changes the shape of the whole story going forward. 3 heroes in, and every single one of them has been male, and every single one of them has broken a boundary by pushing outward. Against the sun, against the sky, against the horizon. The next figure in this mythology breaks a boundary too, but she does it by an entirely different method. Instead of pushing against a limit, she escapes one. And instead of claiming new territory on Earth, she claims territory in the sky itself. permanently, visibly every single night, for anyone who looks up. If you've ever looked up at a full moon and noticed the dark patches on its surface, the shapes people across cultures have read as a face, a rabbit, a woman bent over cloth, Pacific mythology has its own answer for what you're looking at. You're looking at Hina. Specifically, in many tellings, you're looking at her still beating a length of bark cloth, an eternal, silent, lunar chore, visible to anyone who bothers to look up on a clear night. Hina is one of the most widespread figures in the entire Pacific mythological landscape, appearing under slightly different names and slightly different stories from island group to island group, but carrying, almost everywhere, the same emotional center, a woman who reaches a breaking point in an unbearable domestic situation and chooses transformation over endurance. In many versions of her story, Hina is bound to a husband or a domestic arrangement that has become suffocating. Sometimes described as an oppressive marriage, sometimes as an impossible, endlessly repetitive household labor she's expected to perform forever without complaint or relief. The specifics shift from telling to telling, but the emotional core doesn't. She's trapped in a life that was chosen for her or forced upon her with no visible door leading out. This is worth sitting with because it's a genuinely different kind of at stake than anything we've covered so far. Maui risks death fighting the sun. Kupe risks starvation chasing a creature across open ocean. Those are physical risks with physical, external antagonists. Hina's story is about a risk that doesn't require a monster or a god to be devastating. The risk of an entire life spent in quiet, unrelieved constraint with no dramatic villain to blame. Just a structure, a marriage, a role that slowly closes around her like a fist. Her escape, in the most common version, is upward. She climbs, sometimes on a rainbow, sometimes on a beam of moonlight that stretches down to earth like an invitation, leaving the earthly domestic sphere behind entirely and ascending until she reaches the moon itself, where she settles permanently, safe from the constraints that defined her life below. Here is where Hina's story becomes something more than simply a fantasy of escape, and it's the detail most retellings underplay. Her flight to the moon isn't a disappearance, it's a promotion into usefulness. From the moon, Hina becomes something her earthly life never allowed her to be. A guiding, structuring presence for everyone she left behind. Her cycles govern the tides that fishermen depend on to know when to launch their canoes. Her phases mark the calendar that tells farmers when to plant and when to harvest. In cultures where timekeeping wasn't abstract but urgently, practically tied to survival, knowing exactly when the fish would run, exactly when the yams were ready, Hina's presence in the sky wasn't symbolic. It was infrastructure. There's something quietly radical buried in that transformation. Hina doesn't earn her significance by staying inside the structure that constrained her and slowly reforming it from within. She leaves entirely, and from outside that structure, at a genuine, permanent distance, she becomes more essential to the community than she ever was while trapped inside it. The myth seems to be arguing, gently but unmistakably, that some forms of usefulness are only possible once a person has been allowed to leave. In several traditions, Hina is also remembered as a mother or ancestral figure connected to other heroes in this very story, including, in some genealogies, Maui himself. This matters structurally. It means the trickster who nearly conquered death and the woman who escaped an unbearable marriage aren't just neighboring myths sharing a mythology. In the oral memory of these cultures, they're sometimes framed as literally the same bloodline, cosmic defiance and quiet escape, running through the same family. Which brings us to a hero whose defiance takes yet another, completely different shape, where Hina rises above her constraints by leaving the earth entirely. Our next figure, Rata, faces a problem that can't be solved by leaving. because the thing he needs to rebuild is rooted, quite literally, in the earth itself, and the forces working against him aren't a husband or a god, but something stranger, the forest, refusing to be cut. Some heroes fight monsters, some fight gods. Rata's opponent, in the most memorable version of his story, is something almost nobody else in world mythology bothers to personify with this much stubbornness. The forest itself defending its own trees against a man with an axe. The setup is grief, not glory. Rata's father, a chief, a canoe builder, a man of standing, has had his great ocean-going canoe destroyed, taken or wrecked by hostile supernatural forces, depending on which island's version you're hearing. Some tellings connect this loss to a deeper family injury, enemies who killed or wronged Rata's father, leaving Rata not just without a vessel, but without the means to seek any kind of justice or return, since a canoe capable of the voyage he needs to make simply doesn't exist anymore. So Rata decides to build one, not a replacement, but a restoration, an act that in many Pacific traditions carries weight far beyond the practical, since a canoe is never just transport. Its identity, lineage, the physical vessel of a family's ability to move through the world and reach other islands, other alliances, other futures. He selects a great tree, fells it with real effort, and begins the long, exacting work of hollowing and shaping it into a hull. And then he wakes up the next morning to find the tree standing again, whole, uncut, as though his entire day's labor never happened. This is one of the more unsettling images in Pacific mythology, precisely because of how quiet the threat is. There's no monster roaring in the dark, no god hurling thunder. There's just an impossible, silent reversal of physical reality overnight. The kind of thing that would make most people question their own sanity, let alone their chances of ever finishing the task. He tries again. Fells the same tree or another, works through the daylight hours with the same discipline. And again, by morning it's restored, standing tall as if mocking the entire effort. In most versions, this happens because forest guardians or spirits, the living custodians of the trees, are undoing his work each night, either testing him or simply protecting what he's taking without proper respect or ritual acknowledgement. Here's what's genuinely at stake for Rata in this repeated failure, beyond the obvious frustration. Time. Every night the tree rebuilds itself is a night his father's enemies go unanswered, a night his family's ability to travel and trade and defend itself remains broken, a night the entire purpose of the mission slips further out of reach. And there's a psychological trap embedded in the situation too, the kind of despair that comes specifically from effective labor being erased rather than simply failing outright. Failing to fell the tree at all would be one kind of defeat. Felling it successfully, only to watch it undone by something you can't even see, is a much crueler, more destabilizing kind of test. This is where Rata's story pivots into something genuinely instructive, and it separates him sharply from Maui's ambush the sun approach to obstacles. Rata doesn't respond to the sabotage by trying to fell the tree faster, or by attempting to guard it through the night with weapons, or by escalating force against an enemy he can't even see. Instead, in the versions of this story that carry the most weight, he stops, listens, and begins to seek out the forest guardians directly, asking rather than assuming, offering the respect and ritual acknowledgement he'd skipped the first time. The forest, once approached this way, stops working against him and, in many tellings, actively begins to help. Animals and forest spirits assisting the construction rather than undoing it, recognizing in his changed approach a worthiness his first attempt lacked. The finished canoe, once completed, is described as extraordinary, capable of voyages beyond what an ordinary vessel could survive, carrying not just Rata, but the restored honor of his family line. What Rata's story ultimately argues, in contrast to almost every hero before him, is this. Craftsmanship isn't a contest between a person and inert material. Wood isn't just wood. The forest isn't just scenery. In this worldview, creation is a negotiation between the human world and a living, opinionated natural one. And the heroes who succeed aren't always the strongest or the most stubborn. Sometimes they're simply the ones willing to stop, apologize, and ask permission the second time around. So far, every hero we've discussed has faced a challenge that was, in some sense, elemental. The sun, the sky, the ocean, a marriage, a forest. Our next figure faces something entirely different. Not nature, but politics. And she doesn't escape it or negotiate with it. She conquers it on the battlefield as a woman commanding armies in a world that did not automatically hand women that kind of authority. Every mythology eventually produces a figure who exists to answer an uncomfortable question about power. What happens when the existing order has completely failed and somebody has to seize control to fix it? Samoan mythology answers that question with Nafanua, a warrior goddess whose story isn't about defying nature, but about defying the assumption embedded in nearly every hierarchical society that authority belongs to certain people by default and not to others. Into this, Nafanua rises, carrying divine lineage that gives her claim to authority legitimacy in a spiritual sense, but needing, crucially, to back that legitimacy up with real, demonstrated capability, because sacred bloodlines alone were rarely enough to end an active war in this world. She had to actually win. And she does, not through a single miraculous act, but through what the mythology remembers as sustained, deliberate military and strategic leadership, choosing battles carefully, understanding the political map of shifting district loyalties and applying force precisely where it would break the deadlock rather than deepen it. Here's the detail that makes Nafanua's story more than just woman proves she can fight as well as men, which would be a much shallower and more predictable myth. She is remembered equally, and in some tellings primarily, as a prophet. She's said to have foreseen coming shifts in Samoan political and social structure, changes to how power itself would be organized in the future, meaning her authority wasn't just about winning the war in front of her. It was about seeing further down the road than anyone else in the conflict and using that foresight to shape decisions that would outlast her. That combination, decisive military capability paired with long-range political vision, is genuinely rare in world mythology, where warrior figures and seer figures are usually kept in separate boxes. Nafanua's story insists they belong in the same body. Her strength wins the immediate war. Her prophecy legitimizes the peace that follows it, because a peace enforced only by superior force tends to collapse the moment that force looks away. A peace blessed by foreseen, sacred inevitability is far harder for the losing factions to keep contesting. What was actually at risk for Nafanua, in other words, wasn't just her life on the battlefield. Plenty of warriors risked that. It was the much harder, longer-term risk of being remembered as only a conqueror, a temporary military solution to a temporary political problem, rather than as a legitimate, lasting source of order. Her mythology survived and continues to matter in Samoa today because it threaded that needle, martial power in service of restored balance, not power for its own sake. There's a natural pivot from Nafanua's story into our next hero, and it's a pivot in scale, not just geography. Nafanua's battlefield was political. Chiefs, districts, alliances, the machinery of a nation reorganizing itself. Our next hero, Ngaru of the Cook Islands, fights a battlefield that's almost the opposite, intimate, physical, and utterly indifferent to politics. His enemies aren't rival chiefs, they're sharks. And the only strategy that has ever worked against a shark is not the kind you can plan a year in advance. There's a category of danger that runs through every seafaring culture on Earth, and it has nothing to do with gods or politics. The simple, immediate, physical danger of the ocean itself and the creatures that live in it, who have no interest whatsoever in your mythology, your lineage, or your intentions. Ngaru, a hero from Cook Island's tradition, is the figure who embodies facing that danger directly, without the luxury of grand cosmic stakes to dress it up. His stories place him in direct, repeated contact with sharks, ocean spirits, and deep water beings. Not as distant metaphors, but as immediate physical threats in scenes of genuine peril. And what's notable about how these stories frame his survival is what they don't credit. Not overwhelming strength, not a magic weapon capable of ending the fight in one blow, but something closer to what a person actually needs to survive the open ocean in real life. Agility, quick judgment, and the willingness to adapt a plan the instant it stops working. It would be easy to read Ngaru's stories as the smaller myths in this collection. No cosmic sun taming, no climb to heaven, no unification of a fractured nation. But that would misunderstand what these stories were actually for. For communities whose entire survival depended on people going out onto dangerous water, constantly, not occasionally. Fishing, traveling between islands, harvesting from reefs. A hero who survives sharks through cleverness and adaptability wasn't a minor figure. He was arguably the most practically useful hero in the entire mythology, because his stories modeled behavior that ordinary people might actually need on an ordinary Tuesday. In several accounts, Ngaru doesn't survive entirely alone. He's assisted by ancestral or animal spirits who intervene at crucial moments, reinforcing one of the deepest recurring beliefs across this mythology: that the ocean is not simply a hostile void separating islands, but an inhabited, relationship-based space, where survival depends as much on maintaining right relationship with the beings who live there as it does on personal skill. What was at stake for Ngaru, story after story, wasn't civilizational. It was as personal and immediate as stakes get: his own body in the water, facing something that could kill him in seconds if his judgment failed even once. And that's precisely why his myths carry a kind of urgency the grander stories sometimes lack. There's no rope trick, no negotiation with a forest spirit, no vine to heaven. There's just a person in the water, having to be right now. From physical survival in the ocean, the next hero pulls us into an entirely different kind of danger, one with no monster, no god, no rival army. Sinilau's story is about the particular helplessness of a parent whose children have been taken from him, and it belongs to a category of heroism this article hasn't touched yet at all. Heroism defined not by conquest, but by the sheer, grinding effort of trying to fix something that should never have been broken in the first place. Not every hero's crisis begins with a grand cosmic imbalance. Sometimes it begins with the worst thing that can happen to a parent. Their children are taken from them by forces entirely beyond their control. In Tongan tradition, Sinilau's defining story begins with exactly this: his children harmed or taken by supernatural forces, an injury that isn't abstract or symbolic, but as personally devastating as anything in this entire mythology. And what follows isn't a straightforward rescue mission with a single villain and a single climactic confrontation. It's something slower and, in a way, more emotionally demanding. A sustained journey of recovery and justice that asks as much of Sinilau's patience and moral resolve as it does of any physical courage. If you've been following the pattern across this article, you'll notice something Sinilau's story does that the others largely haven't. It centers grief and restoration as the primary emotional material, rather than triumph. Maui's story ends in death. Yes, but it's death as the price of ambition. Sinilau's story exists entirely inside a different emotional register from the start. The fear and helplessness of a father whose family has already been harmed before the story even properly begins. What's at stake for Sinilau isn't glory, and it isn't even, primarily, revenge. Though the mythology does frame his response as involving real accountability for what was done to his family. What's at stake is something quieter and arguably harder to dramatize. Whether a broken family can actually be made whole again, or whether some harms simply have to be lived with. His strength in these stories is measured not in feats of force but in endurance, the capacity to keep pursuing restorations across a long, uncertain process rather than a single decisive battle. This matters for what it tells us about what these cultures valued enough to encode into a heroic archetype. Alongside tricksters who defy the sun and warriors who unify nations, there was also room, necessary room, for a hero whose defining trait was the willingness to keep showing up for his family, methodically, through a difficult and drawn-out process, because the sacredness of kinship bonds in Polynesian society demanded that kind of hero exist in the mythology at all. Sinilau isn't remembered for how spectacular his victory was. He's remembered for refusing to let the disruption of his family be the end of the story. There's a natural, uncomfortable bridge from Sinilau to our next hero, because where Sinilau's story is about restoring a family that was broken from the outside, Ruatapu's story is about a family that was broken from within, by its own rules about who counts as legitimate and who doesn't. Every mythology eventually has to reckon with its own hierarchy, and Maori tradition does it through one of its most unsettling and morally ambiguous figures. Ruatapu, a man whose story doesn't resolve neatly into heroes or villain, no matter which version you're told, and whose ambiguity is itself the entire point. Ruatapu is a son of high status, his father a chief, his bloodline in theory noble. But his birth is contested, considered lesser in status compared to his half-brothers, born of a different, more socially elevated mother. This isn't a minor technicality in a chiefly society built around precise, consequential hierarchies of lineage. It determines what Ruatapu is and isn't entitled to, which ceremonies he can participate in, what respect he's shown, what future is actually available to him regardless of his own individual merit. The specific trigger for the story's central conflict varies by telling, but it generally involves a moment of humiliation. Ruatapu excluded from or publicly disrespected in relation to some sacred or status-marking occasion that his higher-born brothers are granted access to without question, purely by accident of maternal birth, rather than anything he did or didn't do. What follows is genuinely dark by the standards of this mythology. Ruatapu, in the most widely remembered version, takes a devastating, violent action against his higher-status brothers and their companions. A mass drowning in many tellings, carried out at sea, where his brothers are lured into a situation from which they cannot escape. This is where the story refuses to let its audience off easy. A simpler myth would frame this purely as villainy, a resentful, illegitimate son lashing out in monstrous excess. And on one level, that's clearly present in how the story is told. Ruatapu's actions are genuinely horrifying, and the mythology doesn't soften that. But the story also insists structurally on making clear why this happened, not to excuse it, but to indict the system that produced it. Ruatapu isn't born cruel. He's born into a hierarchy that tells him, repeatedly and publicly, that his existence is worth less than his brother's by an accident of birth he had no control over. And the story tracks, with real narrative attention, exactly how that treatment curdles into catastrophic violence. What's at stake in Ruatapu's story isn't really about him individually. It's about the entire chiefly system's own fragility. A social order built on rigid, birth-determined hierarchy is only as stable as the goodwill of everyone it disadvantages, and Ruatapu's mythology functions, whether intentionally or not, as a warning built directly into the culture's own foundational stories. Exclude people from status and dignity for long enough, and the hierarchy itself may eventually manufacture its own destroyer. This is genuinely rare as a piece of cultural self-critique embedded inside a mythology, rather than imposed on it from outside, and it's worth sitting with before moving on, because the next hero returns us to a gentler register entirely. Not conflict, not hierarchy, but the quiet, sustained relationship between humans and the ocean's abundance, and what happens to the people who take too much of it. After the political fracture of Nafanua's story and the violent hierarchy of Ruatapu's, Tinirau's mythology offers something closer to an ecological covenant, a story less about conflict between people and more about the relationship and the obligations between people and the ocean's living abundance. Tinirau, across Polynesian tradition, is widely recognized as a guardian of fish and marine creatures, not simply their overseer in some administrative sense, but a figure for whom the fish of his underwater domain are extensions of a sacred order, not a resource to be extracted without consequence. The stories that survive about Tinirau most often involve friction with humans who disrupt this careful balance. Fishing beyond what's sustainable, disrespecting the ritual protocols meant to govern the relationship between people and marine life, or otherwise treating the ocean's abundance as though it were infinite and owed to them unconditionally. What's genuinely at stake in these stories, when you strip away the mythological framing, is something startlingly practical: the actual, physical sustainability of the fishing grounds that entire island communities depended on for survival. A Pacific island community that overfished its reef wasn't looking at an abstract environmental problem to be addressed at some future policy conference. It was looking at the realistic possibility of starvation within a single generation. No myth required to explain the consequences. Tinirau's mythology encodes that hard truth into something more emotionally and spiritually resonant than a rule or regulation could ever be. By framing fish as sacred, as belonging to a guardian who notices and responds to how they're treated, these stories built a form of environmental stewardship directly into the moral and spiritual fabric of the culture. Not as an external restriction imposed on people, but as a relationship they were already inside of, with real consequences for breaking faith with it. He's remembered across various tellings as husband, father, and protector, reinforcing that his role in the mythology isn't primarily about punishment for transgression, though that's present when needed, but about maintaining a stabilizing, ongoing presence. A reminder, built into the sacred landscape itself, that the ocean's abundance is a relationship to be honored rather than a resource to be exhausted. There's a natural shift from Tinirau's ocean-bound guardianship to our next figure, because Degei moves the entire frame of this mythology away from water and towards something Pacific traditions treat with equal, if different, reverence. Land, mountains, and the deep, immovable foundations beneath everything else. Almost every hero mentioned so far has been defined by movement. Sailing, climbing, chasing, fleeing, fighting. Degei, the great serpent ancestor of Fijian mythology, breaks that pattern entirely, and the break is the point. Degei is associated with creation and the deep origins of the world, tied to mountains and sacred caves rather than open water or sky. Where Kupe's heroism is about traversing vast distances, and Tāwhaki's is about ascending toward the heavens, Degei's mythic role is almost the philosophical opposite. He represents what doesn't move, what has always been there, the foundational bedrock, sometimes literally in the form of mountains, beneath everything else that happens in this mythology. In several traditions, Degei's role extends into something closer to moral oversight than active heroism in the adventuring sense. He's described as observing or judging human behavior with real consequences for how souls or communities fare based on that judgment. This is a meaningfully different kind of mythological function than anything else covered in this article. Māui, Kupe, Rata, Ngaru. All of them are protagonists moving through a world and acting on it. Degei is closer to something the world itself moves around, an anchor point, ancient and largely stationary, whose significance comes from permanence rather than action. What's at stake in Degei's mythology, then, isn't a single dramatic event the way it is for Maui, confronting the sun, or Nafanua, uniting warring districts. It's something more structural, the stability of an entire cosmological framework. Melanesian traditions, of which Fijian mythology is a part, place significant spiritual weight on land, geological features, and the deep connection between specific physical places and ancestral sacred meaning. Degei's mythology is the vehicle for that worldview, a reminder that not every culture organizes its sense of the sacred around the ocean and voyaging the way much of Polynesian mythology does, and that mountains and caves can hold just as much mythic and spiritual gravity as open water. We're nearly at the end of this journey now, and it's worth noticing the shape it's taken. From a trickster who defies the sun and nearly conquers death, through heroes who ascend to heaven, cross oceans, escape marriages, negotiate with forests, unify nations, survive sharks, mend families, embody the danger of exclusion, and steward the sea's abundance. And now, finally, to a serpent who represents nothing more or less than the fact that some things in this cosmology were simply always there. Which leaves one figure left to meet, and he's the strangest inclusion on this list, because he isn't really a hero at all. He's the reason any of these heroes had a universe to act inside of in the first place. Every mythology needs an answer to the question of where everything came from before any of its heroes existed to do anything heroic. In Samoan and broader Polynesian cosmology, that answer is Tagaloa, a figure most traditions consider a deity rather than a hero in the adventuring sense used throughout this article, and whose inclusion here matters precisely because of that distinction. Tagaloa is associated across various tellings with the creation of islands, the structuring of the sky, and the establishment of cosmic order itself. Not a single act of heroism performed within an already existing world, but the condition that makes any heroism possible at all. Before Maui can slow the sun, there has to be a sun and a sky for it to move across, and an ocean floor with islands sunk beneath it waiting to be hauled up. Tagaloa's mythic role is to be the reason those things exist in the first place. It would be tempting, structurally, to place Tagaloa first in an article like this one, since he represents origin. But there's a reason his story belongs at the close instead. Everything you've just read. The ambush of the sun, the climb to heaven, the ocean crossing, the escape to the moon, the negotiation with the forest, the unification of a broken nation, the survival of sharks, the slow repair of a shattered family, the violence born of exclusion, the stewardship of the sea, the permanence of the mountain. All of it only makes sense once you understand what it's set against. An original, foundational order that these heroes are constantly pushing against, negotiating with, defending, or, in Maui's case, ultimately failing to overcome entirely. Tagaloa is the wall itself, drawn all the way back to its source. Everything else in this mythology is what happens when human beings, mortal, ambitious, grieving, resentful, loving, reckless human beings, meet that wall and decide, each in their own way, what to do about it. So we return, finally, to where we began. A man disappearing feet first into the body of the goddess of night, two birds holding their breath, and one of them failing to hold it long enough. Now you know everything that surrounds that moment. You know Maui slowed the sun through preparation and violence, and won. You know Tāwhaki climbed toward heaven through patience and the surrender of vengeance, and won. You know Kupe crossed an ocean chasing a grievance and came home not with conquest, but with a map to give away. You know Hina escaped a life that was crushing her and became, from a genuine distance, more useful to the world than she ever was while trapped inside it. You know, Rata learned that some obstacles only yield to respect, not force. You know, Nafanua proved that legitimate power sometimes has to be seized before it can be inherited. You know, Ngaru survived again and again on nothing but adaptability. You know, Sinilau's strength was simply refusing to stop trying to make his family whole. You know, Ruatapu's violence was manufactured by a hierarchy that told him, from birth, that he mattered less. You know, Tinirau guarded a debt the living owe the sea. You know, Degei represents the parts of the world that were never meant to move. And you know, Tagaloa is the reason any of this had somewhere to happen at all. Against all of that, Maui's final act reads differently than it did at the start. He wasn't reckless, he was consistent. The same man who slowed the sun and hauled up an island, walking straight at the one wall that mythology insisted for every single culture across this ocean could not be moved. He lost. That was always going to be the outcome. The storytellers needed it to be. But notice what the loss did not undo. The sun still moves at the pace he forced on it. The island is still there, mountainous and jagged, exactly the shape his brother's impatience left it. Every one of his victories survived him. Only death itself proved permanent, and even that took the accident of a bird's nervous laugh to secure not overwhelming force, not certainty, but one small, human, uncontrollable mistake at the worst possible second. That, in the end, is the real answer this mythology hands down. Ocean crossing to ocean crossing, generation to generation, fire to fire. The boundary between human ambition and the limits of the world isn't a solid wall. It's a threshold, and the whole terrifying, exhilarating question of a life is how close to it you're willing to walk, and what, exactly, you're willing to become on the way there. The ocean, as these 12 stories insist from a dozen different coastlines, was never simply water separating one island from another. It was memory, it was warning, it was invitation. And for 1,000 years before anyone wrote a word of it down, it was already telling you the answer to the only question that ever really mattered. Not whether the line can be crossed, but what it costs and who you become the moment you decide to try.